One of the most fascinating things I learned when researching Stephen King's The Gunslinger was just how old this story is. If you've done any researching of The Gunslinger or any of the Dark Tower series, you probably learned about the poem Childe Roland to the Dark Tower Came by Robert Browning. Stephen King might claim he doesn't know where he gets his ideas from, but it's pretty clear that he got much of the ideas and inspiration from the Dark Tower series from this poem. If you take a moment and read Childe Roland from the Dark Tower Came, you'll see how much of the Gunslinger and the Dark Tower series come from this poem. But if you start to dig a little deeper, you'll see that Robert Browning got his inspiration from William Shakespeare. So the Robert Browning poem, Childe Roland to the Dark Tower Came, was written January 2nd, 1852. But if you start to follow the lineage back, and you see that Browning got his inspiration from Shakespeare because the line, Childe Roland to the Dark Tower Came, his word was still fee, foe, and fum. I smell the blood of a British man. And that line was from King Lear, Act 3, Scene 4, lines 195 and 197. That was written in 1607. So we started out at a modern story, and now we've gone back to the 1600s. But if you want to know where William Shakespeare got his inspiration for that part in King Lear, you can follow that back to the Song of Rolland, which the Song of Rolland is an 11th century French story that was written back in 1040 AD. So now we've gone back to around the year 1000. So we've got a story by Stephen King that you can trace the lineage back to like 4,000 years ago. And even that goes back a little farther. I'm reading here in Wikipedia. The Song of Rolland is an 11th century based on the Frankish military leader Rolland at the Battle of Roxun, I can't pronounce that necessarily, but pass in AD 778 during the reign of King Charlemagne, is the oldest survivor major work of the French literature. It exists in various manuscripts which testify to its enormous, enduring popularity in medieval and Renaissance literature from the 12th to the 16th century. It's really quite phenomenal to learn, because when you read the Gunslinger and the Dark Tower series, you start to learn how these stories are so old, and they're biblical in their measure of how good these stories are being told. And in the Gunslinger, you will follow Rolland, and of course you got that iconic line, "The man in black fled across the desert, and the gunslinger followed." And that's where it all starts. Rolland, he's going across this wasteland, this desert. It says the apotheosis of all deserts. And, he's like the apostolosis of the gunslinger. He's like this ancient magic wizard. Well, he's not a wizard because he says many times, "I'm just a man." But when you watch him work, you can see how he does some of this soft magic when he hypnotizes the boy by tumbling a bullet, a shell casing across his knuckles. And when he uses some words and he conjures magic. But when you see the magic of the man in black in the story, like later on, towards the end of the story, he foretells the future of the gunslinger with tarot cards. And you also watch the man in black, flick a rabbit out of his sleeve or make fire from his fingertips. So the man in black definitely has some like sorcerer abilities. And that's fascinating. And watching, traveling through the wasteland, through the desert with Rolland, and he stops at the bar and he meets the woman there, and there's like that little bit of a, you see that the tussle of like how hungry people are for just love or any kind of comfort in the story. And Rolland falls in love with the boy that is actually sent to him by the dark man, by the man in black.